ask a question, but I do want to just spend the first little moment to acknowledge country. And I recently read, it's not a new book, but Song Spirals, which was a book written by a group of women, Yolngu women and non-Indigenous women, about a range of song lines. The book explains a group of song lines, to audiences non-Indigenous, from a non-Indigenous and Indigenous perspective, but it just has a really beautiful acknowledgement of country, and I picked it up because I have been thinking about kind of the ecology of where we are now in Michelle's work on this show, and I think it's a nice kind of way to introduce the conversation today. So just bear with me while I read it. But country is the keeper of knowledge. It guides us and teaches us. Country has awareness. It is not just a backdrop. It knows and is part of us. Country is homeland. It is home and land, but it is also more than that. It's the seas and the waters, the rocks and the soils, the animals and winds and people too. It's the connections between those beings and their dreams and emotions, their languages and their law. Country is the way that humans and non-humans co-become, the way we emerge together, have always emerged together, and will always emerge together. It is all of the feelings, the songs and the ceremonies, the things we cannot understand, the things we cannot touch, and the things that go beyond us. They anchor us in eternity, in the infinite cycles of kinship, sharing and responsibility. Country is the way we mix and merge, the way we are different and yet become together, a part of each other. It is the messages, languages and communication from all beings to all beings. Country is the song spiral. So with that, I'd like to just acknowledge the Borrabal, the Kunaragal, the Bidjigal, Yuin and all the Aboriginal people of Greater Coastal Sydney that have cared for this country that is directly drawn on in this show, and any Aboriginal people joining us here today.
That was a beautiful introduction. Actually, it really captures the ideas behind my work so beautifully. I think, as Izzy mentioned, I've spent a lot of time to and fro in Japan, and Indigenous Japanese culture is also animist, and they really believe that they are part of the environment and that spirits live within the same world that they do. You walk in the bush in Japan and there's all sorts of beautiful little effigies to the spirits of the land. So I think it's a universal concept, really.
Definitely, no, and it's thinking about kind of systems view of the world and observation, I think is very pertinent. But I suppose if we can take a step back, maybe Michelle and I'm a huge fan of Krista Tippett and On Being. Some of you may know her podcast, but she always starts with that same question. But and I'm going to just directly copy it. And it's if you can just share a little bit about kind of the creative or artistic kind of background of your childhood.
My childhood? Oh. So my sister is here, and she's 10 years older than me. So and she got married at 20. So from the age of 10, I was really an only child, and I did spend a lot of time drawing and sewing. But I love drawing, and in fact, the girl across the road also loved drawing, and so we spent a lot of time together. And she ended up becoming an animator, and I was always very jealous of her fluency. Her mother was a very good painter too, the fluency of her line, whereas mine always seemed a little bit stiff by comparison. But I did spend a lot of time on paper, and then I studied art in high school, and I have to give credit to my art teacher. I won the prize in sixth form for art, and that gave me a sense of confidence that I would have a bit of an ability beyond what I thought I had. So that's the answer.
No, it's good. I know it's a bit of a weird one, but there's a trajectory, and it starts. My background also is in arts education. That's how I kind of came to arts management, maybe more so. So I'm always interested to know the environment that someone grows up in. For me, I had white walls and the pear soap, on the wall of our bathroom, and that was kind of it. But it's
my parents are European, and so we always had things on our walls. Not great art, but there was always a lot of art on our walls and also on the walls of my parents' friends. So I did grow up seeing that European concept of art.
And then I suppose before we actually get into the show, formal art training, when did that occur? How did that happen?
So after school, I got a scholarship to Japan, but I had already applied to go to NIDA to do second costume design, which is, you know, a visual art in its own form. And I went to Japan, came back, and did a year at NIDA, but it was quite a difficult environment, and I was probably going a little bit off the rails, so I was encouraged to go to university and get a degree in something that I could fall back on. So I ended up doing that. I studied Japanese and I studied economics, and then after we had our two sons, I decided the money I was earning relative to what my husband was spending didn't make it worthwhile, so I took up art again, and I went back to Julian Ashton Art School, and Ian Chapman, one of my teachers from Julian Ashton, and some of my other teachers from Royal Art Society. So I had a long journey until when was it? I went to the National Art School in 2007, 8, 9. I needed to pull together all the information that I had gathered at the various courses that I'd done, and National Art School did consolidate that.
Yeah, and maybe if you could just touch on it. I know we spoke about it briefly this week about the specializations and, you know, actually coming to painting, or, you know, this version of how you are painting through that process.
So I think having started at Ashton's, which is very much about the discipline of looking carefully, observational drawing and painting in oil, that was the beginning of my formal training. And then I also went to the Royal Art Society, which is again about classical technique. And you can't let go of that once you've been taught it. It's sort of in your bones. So even in this work here, I do start off with representation, and it's only once I really feel like I know and understand my subject that I can let it go. And this body of work over here on this wall, they were the last works I'd done after I'd done this much more representational depiction of the subject matter, if you like. I'm not an abstract artist. I'd love to be, but I'm not. I think that there is a taste for abstraction today because we have so much imagery on our phones, computer screens, and everywhere else that people actually want to see an interpretation of life rather than just another representation. So I think I'm going to explore this idea a little further going forward.
Yeah, particularly resolves works, and we'll come back to that. But if we just return to the title of the show, Resilience, and we'll talk about abstraction potentially at the end of the talk. We might make you an abstract painting by the end of it. But just to, for me, this show, and Michelle's work, and I've been fortunate to be in the studio when they were kind of in the last moments, but, there is more here than just you simply observing the landscape and documenting what you see, making an image. I feel actually this kind of much more profound systems thinking about the ecology, deeply thinking about the place where you're making work. But the word resilience, we use it in ecology. It's used a lot by the field of ecology, not so much in art history. But if you could just maybe expand on that word and how you kind of arrived at the thinking about exhibition making as a whole.
Big question. So I grew up on the bush, on the Lane Cove River, and spent a lot of time in the bush. I live on Sydney Harbour and walk in the bush 2, 3, 4 times a week. And then we spend time up at Pittwater, and again I walk in the bush there. I was also on the board of of the Australian Wildlife Conservancy for 10 years, so I am very deeply engaged with the importance of preserving our natural environment and biodiversity. So I think my engagement is very much from the heart. I'm not religious, I'm not even spiritual particularly, but I must say that being in the physical environment really does feed my soul. I think that's my form of spirituality, if you like. And the process of painting is very slow. I brought some, am I going to do this now?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I walk, I look. I think as an artist, you become much more attuned to the visual world around you. So I think I see things beyond my walking partners. I'm always saying, oh, look at this and look at that, looking up and looking down. So I'm observing constantly when I'm walking. I do take a lot of photos as well. Then I'll often go and sit in the landscape with these concertinas and sketch. And I'll get drawn to certain shapes or forms. And then when I'm back in the studio, I will draw on some of those forms to develop the artworks. Yeah, we can pass them around. In the studio, particularly with oil painting, it's a very slow process. Oil takes a long time to dry, and I try not to use any medium because I find it quite toxic. So I'm just using paint and oil. So it gives you time to think about what it is you're trying to say. And I've realised that I'm a narrative painter. I like to tell a story in my paintings. So all of them is about the interaction between the trees, the birds, clean air, sunlight, trees being supported by rocks, being strangled by vines. So there's a lot of communication in the natural world that I don't think we're deeply aware of yet. There's a lot of competition for those resources, light, water, good soil, and particularly in the Australian bush with our angophores, which are our local trees, they're constantly shifting direction to maximise their survival. So all of these paintings are really about the interaction between all the different forms that you see, even the ones based on the water. I mean, these are the Punchaway in front of our house, and there's so much life in those rock pools. It's incredible, and we've got to preserve it. I guess that's the message that I'm trying to suggest. I think it's really important for future generations that we preserve as much as we can a clean natural environment.
Yeah, it's I think that there's a very quiet kind of advocacy for the environment through this work, and I know that you wouldn't necessarily think it's a political show, but I think the very act of what you're saying there is it comes through in the work. And I have been doing simultaneously to starting a new job. I'm also curating this show for Tamworth, the Textile Triennial, but I've been doing a lot of research into different ways that non-Indigenous ecologists have kind of transferred or reimagined frameworks for traditional ecological knowledge, which is to say, people who deeply understand place and exactly what you're saying, understand the tensions, understand where the angophores are growing, what that's doing to the environment, what erosion is, what the water is naturally doing to erosion on the landscape as part of this kind of complex system of return, decay, resilience, etc. But there's some research by Fikret Berks. He's a Turkish-Canadian ecologist, but he has developed this framework called the knowledge, practice, belief complex. And it's nothing to tell you about it, but I just found an interesting overlap with your work and, maybe all kind of landscape painting is that he has this tiered system, the bottom tier being knowledge, for you, observation, empirical details about the plants, the animals, fauna, flora, the cycles of the ecosystem, gathered over long periods for an artist, deep observation. I think Michelle probably spent the better part of 2 years developing this body of work. The tier above that is practice. In ecology, they're looking at kind of tools, land use methods, but I would suggest for an artist, you know, the actual process of making images in a studio, and we might, I'll ask you about that in a minute. And then on top of that framework is belief, which is kind of like a spiritual connection, or the cultural values, social rules that kind of give meaning to humans' relationships with the natural environment. And I just thought it's a good kind of framework for reading your show, because, you know, you immediately said kind of, you know, you're not a religious or you're not overly spiritual, but for me this show is actually incredibly emotional, and there is that kind of connection. I can feel, you know, I think you can feel it in the work. But to go back to that bottom one of knowledge, and you spoke briefly about it, but I just wanted you to speak briefly to your studio. You know, it's an incredible place. It's a generative place to be making, and has a clear impact on your work.
So I have a studio. I'm very fortunate, and some of my studio buddies are here today at Headland Park at the end of Middlehead Road in Mosman. So it's old military buildings that have been converted to artist studios. There are about 20 artists there, and so it's wonderful having a community. I mean, making art, you really need focus and concentration, and I'm very lucky because the space I'm in now, there are 3 of us, and we all know that when we're working, we don't talk, we don't have audible music, and then you can hopefully get into the zone and really concentrate on what you're doing. But on the other hand, you have fresh eyes to look at your work if you are not sure about something, someone to chat with over lunch if you want to, and also having other artists around sort of validates the madness of the practice. Because, you know, you do ask yourself, why am I doing this? It's a compulsion, it's a passion, and you can't let it go, but you can't survive on it. Very few artists can actually survive off their practice. But knowing that there's other people that are just as deeply committed to their own artwork makes you feel like you're not crazy. So it's a very fortunate environment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and in terms of arriving to the studio and your proximity to these landscapes, what's the process of arriving for you in the studio?
So, the studio, I turn off my phone, and I don't have the computer there, so it's about 15 minutes from home, which is very fortunate because it means I can go there for 3 or 4 hours and then get home and do the emails to do with the Dobell Foundation or whatever else. Get there and we say hello, and then I get changed into my painting clothes. You should see me when I'm painting. I think you have, Blake, and just start working. I sometimes draw, but I'm often halfway through a painting and I'll come in and look at it, and there'll be other paintings on the wall, and they're sort of like works in progress. You see things, having not seen it for a night, you see things that are not working particularly well. And that's the beauty of oil paint, is that for me anyway, I can layer up and block out elements that don't work. The environment is also surrounded by bushland on Sydney Harbour, so I can go for a walk if I need more material. When I was doing these lino cuts, I would often go in there in the bush, and I'm just amazed by these weird, wonderful shapes that you find in nature. You know, big tree trunks, bird stumps, you know, forms growing over rocks, and then, as I said here, strangulated by vines. So I can step out and in 10 minutes be in wonderful bushland and get source material, which is really a blessing.
Yeah, and I suppose to talk then about process, you touched on it now, but I mean, you were quick to say that you're not an abstract painter, but for me there's kind of this like real mapping, in thinking about this exhibition as a whole, this real mapping of, you know, that is going from a more representational traditional way of painting landscape to these kind of intertidal, more topographic, almost completely abstract, compositions, and then kind of naturally then to this body of work where you can explain the process, but where there's this like clear negative space, or that is painted over or painted under, I'm not sure, you can explain, that isolates these subjects in a way that one could connect how then the next iteration of this would be to completely become an abstract painting. But it's not there, which is not a criticism at all. I find it kind of quite a chronological display of getting toward that. And maybe if you want to speak to them, particularly these works where that negative space has been blocked out.
So the process was definitely, I'd lay down the earth colours, if you like, and then come back and block out areas. I think, you can see I can't let go. I can't let go of forms and some form of representation. I don't know why. I think if I keep pushing it, I might be able to get there. I mean, I shared a studio with an artist many, many years ago in King's Cross, and she was just intuitively abstract. I don't think she could draw, but she was very happy just working over and over and layering up. Whereas I, for whatever reason, you've got to be true to yourself as an artist. That's the other thing. You can't escape who you are. But I'm very happy with these works. I love the way. So it's a very limited palette. I use basically a burnt sienna, a green, and a raw sienna, and that's.
What was the first colour you said?
Burnt sienna.
Right.
Yeah, and I mix it with green, and then I get the browns, the dark browns. And then that blocking out has some white in it because I needed to block out areas that I didn't want to be revealed anymore. So it has been quite a journey, and I've got to thank Linda, the gallery director, who came into the studio probably, 3, 4, 5 months ago, and liked this little work in the middle, which is probably the only seriously political work in the exhibition, the little square one, which I painted when I think it was Russia attacked Ukraine, and so it was, this sort of standoff in a very abstract way in the natural environment, which you do see as well. And she said, "Oh, I love that work." I thought, all right, well, I could probably keep pushing that concept along, and so then the other ones came out of that. So thank you, Linda. Wherever you are, there she is.
That's what a good gallery should be doing. And I suppose just to then go to that final tier of that system that I was talking to, which is belief. And you haven't shied away from your obsession with Japan, and the exhibition concept outlines that concept of mujo and how that has influenced your work. And I think it is a really interesting point because you've made works that are more directly about Japan in your past. This is definitely a different body of work, yet you're kind of working with that, these universal concepts, as you mentioned, that I think really shine through, particularly with the restraint of those works. There's a kind of aesthetic.
The minimalism of Japanese, or some of Japanese art forms, that reduction, and I really try to reduce in these works. And I'd like to try that further. But yes, look, we're part of nature, and there's a lot of, we're living in a world at the moment where there's a lot of conflict, again over resources, and that idea is actually embedded in a lot of this work as well, that humans are competing over resources, nature is competing over limited resources. It's not always a pretty outcome, but it is what it is. But out of the destruction is often renewal and great outcomes. So that's life.
Yeah, and it's also a conundrum with landscape painting of how to to do this in a way that's not extractive, you know, and I've spent many years thinking about extraction on an industrial scale when I was working at Broken Hill, but which also seems to be a kind of a popular concept for artists to reckon with in terms of, you know, extraction of resources from a human standpoint. But as you say, nature is in a constant cycle of battling for resources. But I think that to mirror that process in the artistic process is also relevant to you in terms of how, as an artist, can you represent this country, these landscapes in a way that's sustaining the ideology, the kind of connection you feel to it, rather than depleting it from an extractive point of view. You know, these are not just typical landscapes that you've smashed out and sold and moved on. You know, you've thought much more deeply about them. And just as a little bit of a moving the conversation along, I just also wanted to ask you about the lino cuts, the prints. And, you know, I know people know the process here, but if you just start by kind of going over that process, because, you know, the one that I'm staring at directly here, it's, you know, it's completely abstract in my mind.
Well, yes.
Yeah, you know, these
they are the most abstract. Well, these ones, I think I've called them tree talk. Again, it's about that interaction between the forms in nature, and they do communicate. We know below the ground and above ground, supporting each other. To tell the truth, I did those over the summer period when I know I can't be in the studio as much as I'd like to be because of family commitments, and we're on the boat. But the beauty of lino cuts is once you've got your basic concept, it's just about the process of carving. And that takes time, and I can do that anywhere, so I could do them at home, I could do the carving on the boat. And then the printing of them is on Japanese washi paper. I mean, lino cut is a tradition in Japan, and I'd seen a lot of it when I was over there. Some of them are done on one single piece of lino, these square ones. These ones are the sort of tree-like forms, if you like, have got multiple elements that I would arrange in different patterns and then print with them. So that one there has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 6 elements that I've put together. There's a lot of failure. The printing process, it's all being done by hand, so it's very slow. I've got a barren and I'm rubbing the paper on top of the inked matrix. They don't all work, there's smudging, it's a very, very slow process. But it's also, everything's in reverse, so it's very good for your brain. You have a concept in your mind, and then you carve it in reverse, and then it gets printed again. So it's a very good mental exercise to help me avoid dementia. And I love them. I must say, I was very happy with those, and I will continue to. I'd like to actually do some larger scale. And just as last week, I was contacted by one of the girls who I went through art school with, who does a lot of lino printing, and she suggested we do a group show next year. And I thought, right, she's the person, and I think I will expand on this idea of bringing together lots of different elements and again pushing down that abstraction road.
And in a way you're forced to do that. You know, you can see a clear correlation between those paintings and those lino prints. But speaking of exercise, you know, you mentioned you're a walker. Walking is kind of, I mean, it's obvious that walking is a kind of central part to your practice, as is a common theme in many landscape painters' practice. And I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on walking and making.
Oh, I love walking. I used to be a runner, but I don't run anymore. I just think being in the natural environment. I remember all the walks I do are in the bush. I avoid the road as much as possible. There's so much to feed your soul when you're looking around, and particularly coastal. You've got the blue of the water, the blue of the sky, you know, against the background of or as the background to the natural bushland. I love to move my body in space. I think it's one of the great joys is being able to use your body, and so I did a big walk this morning. Walked from home to Belgiorno with 2 grandchildren and the dog and my daughter-in-law, and then we ultimately left them at the park when their father arrived, and then we did another big walk up and over the hill at Belgiorno and back again. I was exhausted by the time I came home, but it's you know, it's really, I'm very lucky, I think, to have that. And there are 2, I will use this as a bit of a platform. There are 2 projects that we support at the moment. One is the preservation of HMAS penguin on Belgiorno slopes and the adjoining beautiful Angofera forest that the government are trying to sell off to get a bit of cash. So we're working hard. Lisa Paulson is here.
Thank you, Michelle, for your support. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're working hard to preserve that so it's not turned into ugly high-rise for future generations. And then the other thing we also are supporting is to turn an area from the western end of Belgiorno Beach all the way to Chinaman's Beach into a marine sanctuary so that we can regenerate seagrasses and repopulate the area with a diversity of sea life. I've lived in that area for nearly 40 years, and when we moved in there was commercial fishing in the area, there was that much fish, there was seaweed and seagrass everywhere, and it's all gone. And I think it would be wonderful. I don't know if any of you saw the David Attenborough film last year, but he talks about the importance of preserving sanctuaries so that we can repopulate biodiversity in the water, in the sea, and then that spreads beyond those sanctuaries, and you know, everybody can benefit. So they're my 2 passions at the moment that Guido and I are supporting.
Yeah, and it's like they're important projects, of course. But you know, I've come into Mosman and you know, I've been there 10 seconds. But you know, kind of tracing these, you know, Australian art history in the area, which is obviously so rich. Artist camps, you know, people painting the area. It's, you can, you know, there's this incredible trajectory, and I suppose putting your archivist hat on and seeing these paintings as markers of what the environment looked like, was doing, the state of it at that time, is particularly pertinent. And with your work, of course, the same. You know, should all of those projects go ahead and it look very different in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, you know, these paintings are also kind of historical markers in that sense, which, you know, is something that's like very front and center in the Mosman collection. You know, in terms of actually being able to track those visual changes. And I know that's not what you're thinking about when you're in the studio, maybe, but there is that kind of quiet activism to you know, this preservation of nature, which I think is gentle.
Can't really answer that. Thank you, Frank. Any questions? Has anybody got any questions?
First of all, a sincere congratulations to you 2. It's been a wonderful exchange. I think I've got a tremendous amount from it, so thank you. Truly inspirational, and in the sense, inspirational, breathing breath into, inspire. So thank you. And there's so much I could talk about, but one thing that I really noticed in the wonderful evolution you've been through, the process you've got at the moment is traditional academic in the sense that you're using oils as undercolour, and then you evolve it and you block out with opaques what you don't want or what you need to build up, and you've avoided the unfortunate fashion of painting with a shovel, in oils with a shovel that exists at the moment. I know there's a Japanese influence, but they're absolutely beautiful. Congratulations, and thank you so much for bringing so much out in the talk.
Thank you for me too, Blake. It's been great. I wasn't sure how it would go.
Are we good for time? We can take more questions, but I just also wanted to congratulate Michelle. Her painting is, will be, well, this show is up for a little bit longer, but for getting into the Mosman Art Prize too. It's my first art prize as being the director So particularly exciting. So congratulations, and really congratulations on the show. So it's a beautiful body of work. It's been an absolute pleasure to, well, be in the studio and be at the Headland Arts Precinct, but and for being, you know, such a support coming into the role. So thanks, Michelle. Congratulations.
And good luck with revitalising the Mosman Art Gallery. I mean, it's a really important institution. We're very lucky to have it, and we welcome your youthful energy and you know, the experience that you bring to it too. I'd like to also just acknowledge so many people here today from so many years of my past. It's very touching. Really, thank you everybody for coming and showing interest. We were just talking earlier with a couple of the artists from Headland Park that are here. You know, you do ask yourself, why do I keep doing this? And one of the answers is, it's got to be seen. You've got to share it with others. And so I'm so glad to be able to share it with you all today. So thank you.
Sorry, I just have one question, if I may. I'm looking at your colour palette over here in the small paintings over here, and the palette here, and the pale blue, which I think is really interesting, given that we often have very intense blue skies. I'm just wondering.
I often look at the door of my studio at the sky,
Yeah.
and it's not that blue. I'm really looking carefully because, and also I find that the blue doesn't always go with the green. I don't know, it's just an aesthetic thing. So I do try and knock it back. None of the colours are pure, they're all mixtures, but the blue is often mixed with yellow to kind of knock it back.
Very beautiful. Yeah.
And also trees have this very strange ability to kind of mess with the colour blue.
Yeah. Well, the Blue Mountains, you know, the oils from the eucalypts affect our perception of the colour of the sky. I guess when you look up, it can be very, very blue. But when you're looking out through the trees, it's often not that blue.
The colour reminds me of morning, that blue sky,
Yeah.
more than midday or afternoon.
Yeah.
So you like the mornings?
I do like the mornings. I'm much fresher in the morning. I am a morning person.
Any other questions before we wrap up?
Michelle, just as a non-artist, I'm interested to understand how you translate this sketchwork that you do. How does that translate with your work?
I take elements from those. So none of these are taken from a photo. They're all made up images where I'll have those concertinas on my desk and I'll take elements from there. I have hundreds of photographs, so I'll refer to those and then I'll make it up and I'll take things out that I don't want in there. So this one was, I think this was the first of this series of 4. Where I really was trying to capture that struggle and the density of the bush and all the different angles that the trees have got to change their direction in, you know, to seek good light. And then slowly I sort of reduced things to this because it was really just about the communication between the trees and their survival on the rocks and these new little plants. And it's a picture of hope, I guess. I am a bit of an optimist, and that was again about that renewal or resilience, you know, the survival.
It's not what you put in, it's what you leave out.
Yeah, which is, you know, poetry, really, ultimately. That's the beauty of poetry.
And the way to make it harder for yourself.
Yes.
Yes, I bought one of your linear things here. I was thinking to myself, why would I buy it? It comes down to the balls. So I'm asking you, why did you position the balls where you positioned them? And do they mean different things to you in terms of where you position them?
So the balls can be the sun, they can be the moon, they can be a bit of humour, and they're just part of the composition. again, having seen a lot of Japanese art, you do get the moon represented quite often. And it's an important part that drives the female cycle. We are very much part of nature, but we live in big cities and we forget that, I think. So the placement of the moon in a lot of them, or the ball, in a lot of them is more about the moon, I guess, than anything. But in this one just here, it just seems so right to be just bouncing on that little tail of that figure. So that's it.
Yeah.
That's the artist's prerogative.
You see, you say we're not political, but the one I bought was very political, in my view, right? Because the ball can be equated to a tennis ball, sport, or it can be equated to the globe. And those two stick trees, or whatever you call them, are very strong. They come very strong. And that could be quite easily the old Soviet Union, capitalist West, or the current PRC, Trump USA, and then play with the world.
That's a great interpretation.
Very political.
But that's the beauty of art as well. Particularly, I think, with the abstract art, but all art. We read it and we interpret it through the lens of our own experience and the time that we're living in. And I think that's the great thing about art, is that it opens your mind to so many different ideas, and it's so non-descriptive in many ways. So I love your interpretation. Thank you very much.
You obviously know the one I bought.
I do know the one you bought. Now I'm going to look at it. I'm going to look at it again.
Hi, Michelle. Can you tell me a bit about the inspiration of this tangle?
The tangle. So a lot of our coastal bush is quite degraded. I think we have walking tracks through there. The soil is not great, and many of the trees are actually strangled or almost strangled by this vine. You must do the walk from Middle Head around the headland, and you will see a lot of the vines. You'll see wasp nest growing there. They're huge. Some of the images over there with these kind of lumpy forms. So there is a lot of damage.
Isn't that native vine?
Native. Well, I think they are native. Yes. And yes, I'm pretty sure they're native, because otherwise the national parks would be removing them. We have a lot of lantana in our coastal bush, and although it's considered a pest and an introduced species, the beauty of the lantana is that it provides a safe haven for our little passerine birds, so they can hide in there from the cats and the foxes that are also quite persistent in our bushland. The other day I was walking and there was a very unusual bird call. I was with Deb. We don't know what bird it was, but it wasn't the usual little wrens. We do get in springtime, we get these wrens with bright red tummies and bright electric blue tummies, but this wasn't one of those, and it had a very unusual call, so I need to look it up, but I haven't got to that yet. But yes, these vines are, they do sometimes destroy the trees, but sometimes they coexist. And then again, you get this sense of hope, this branch coming out, and often you'll get a half-dead tree and then there'll just be this sprout of new life. And I think, oh, isn't that so optimistic?
And the little birds are just so cute.
And the little birds, yes, there's always birds. There's a few sort of suggestions of birds in there.
Actually, there's so many more birds in that at first glance, you assume.
There's a brush turkey in that one. Well, they're ubiquitous in our bush too. And they were almost extinct in the 1930s. They were wiped out because there was no food, and so people were eating brush turkeys. It must have tasted absolutely disgusting. And now they are such a pest in Mosman.
And you can dine with them, the Frenchies.
New town.
Yeah, there are gangs in Willoughby.
Yeah, there's no shortage around your studios. If there's no more questions, we might leave it at that, but other than for me to say, you should buy some more work.
Yes, please take them home. Thank you.
And please stick around, there's water and snacks, and come and see Michelle.
Michelle.
Very nice to meet you. Yeah. She always takes me back to my well, I mean, that's really the wrong thing to say. I should be pining.